Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Emmerich, and I'm the Manager of Digital Content here with Boys Town National Training. And I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. Um, let's see. Just want to check in and see that we're getting everybody logged in, and we'll get started right now at 1 o'clock. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping type of things and give you some information, then we'll get right into our content. Let me send a little little note here in the chat box. Can everyone hear me? So I want to do a little sound check and make sure we're connected. So if you're hearing me okay, I'm seeing some yeses. That's awesome. All right. Okay. Hopefully, hopefully we are all connected and good. If you have any issues, if you need to leave early, anything like that, we are recording. So since you have all registered and attended and are logged in now, okay, Kevin, okay. I'll work with him. Let me send him a little message. We have one person who's having a little trouble. Okay, I will check in. Okay, a couple things for everybody who can hear me. We're going to get started, and as I said, we are recording. We will have a download for you, so you will have access to anything we share on the screen and some other different types of information that we've put together for you today. Our topic is creating calm in the classroom, and this is part of our monthly webinar series. And a couple things too. In your chat box, we want you to share your questions throughout. And so if you look and having your chat box open, if you can make sure the to is set to everyone, so everyone can see your questions, we'll share those, and I will be monitoring the chat box throughout. So we really want to, as questions come up, just shoot them in there, and we'll include those in our conversation today. So I want to start out first with introducing our two presenters, and so I got to cancel that. So let me stop sharing my screen so we can see you guys. Share. Or I want to stop sharing this program. Do you want to? No. There we go. All right. So Steph, we have Steph Jensen and John McGuire. So Steph, will you take a few minutes to just introduce yourself and tell us what you do at Boys Town and your experience with the Boys Town education model?
Yes, hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Oh, can you hear me? Because it says I'm not muted. Oh, told me I was muted. Okay. Oh. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Apologize for that little glitch. My name is Steph Jensen, and I started my journey in education almost 23 years ago now, and started as a middle school teacher. Love middle schoolers. I love that they're unpredictable and just a little crazy sometimes. I like to say we do sometimes reflect the kiddos that we choose to spend our lives with. So I'm a little predictable and seem a little crazy sometimes too. So we got along just fine. My first year of teaching was a struggle, and really was because I did not have any foundation or any training really in how to manage a classroom and how to kind of attend to the social emotional learning needs in a similar way that I was prepared to attend to academic needs. Thankfully, my second year of teaching, our school adopted the Boys Town education model, and it really did set the course for me as an educator to be able to view behavior mistakes, especially under a similar lens that I viewed academic mistakes, and have some similar ways to respond in those situations instead of always being kind of in reactionary mode. So I'm happy to be here today and be able to share some of those strategies and some of those interventions that really allowed me to stay in the profession of teaching and be more successful.
Great, thanks, Steph. My dog just completely lost it there for a second, so I think I need some tips on creating calm in my home. So I apologize for this, but John, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you can introduce yourself, and I'm going to get her quiet.
All right, thanks, Stephanie. My name is John McGuire. Nice to see everybody today. Thanks for joining us. Just a little bit of background here. I actually got my start within Boys Town's residential program back in 1987. Seems like a lifetime ago, and spent several years actually working in one of our residential homes on the Boys Town campus in Omaha. From there, moved on to several administrative types of positions, left Boys Town for a short period of time and actually taught in one of the area public school districts, and having at least a little bit of exposure to the Boys Town model prior to teaching certainly made a big impact for me and probably hopefully for the students that I worked with as well. But eventually came back to Boys Town to the role that I'm in now, where I get to kind of a unique opportunity to work with lots of different schools and school districts all around the country, lots of teachers, principals, superintendents, and really helping them, with our help, helping them put together a plan where we actually will be able to kind of help them implement the Boys Town model in their school. And so I get to, again, the cool part is just getting to work with lots of different people from all over the country, from schools of every, shape, size, and demographic you can think of. Is a pretty unique opportunity. So done a lot of different things within Boys Town, and happy to be here today and looking forward to having a chance to talk with you.
Great, thank you. So John and Steph will be our main presenters today, and we have, let's see here, we have a little message here. Okay, very good. And with everyone, as attendees, just to control bandwidth and communication and everything, you guys are all entering muted and not able to use your mics or your videos, so you're all good. As long as you can see us on the screen and you can hear us, then you can chat with us using your chat box. And that way we can, but enter your questions throughout, because we really want this to be a conversation. John and Steph have some tools and strategies they're going to talk through with us today, but we want to hear from you, and we want to talk through and answer any of your questions and things that have come up so we can learn more. So just throw your questions in there. I'll keep an eye on it. And John and Steph, I'm going to throw it over to you. And Steph, I think you're going to start out and tell us, our topic today is creating calm in the classroom. Why is this so important? I mean, what can this do, and why should this be a focus?
Yeah, excellent. And, I think a few things come to mind here, and being that calm in the classroom. And I think that that's one of the things that I learned very early on, was that if I had a plan to stay calm, I also then was able to create calm. And it became very obvious to me early in my teaching career that if I wasn't calm, our space wasn't calm. So I kind of find that both of those things are contagious. So kind of that crisis mode is contagious, but so is calmness. Calmness is also contagious in the classroom. And so when we have a specific focus to create that calm, the entire environment benefits from that. And when we look at what we've all been facing here in the last year with COVID, I think that concept, or that idea of bringing the calm in a crisis situation becomes even more impactful or even more meaningful for us as educators. And so we've got to go to that next slide and just look at what has happened to mental wellness just overall since the beginning of our COVID quarantines. And what we're finding is a significant increase in stress and trauma. And so as we look at this collectively, we are looking at a collective trauma. We have all experienced some level of stress or trauma, or additional stress and trauma, because of the COVID pandemic. So whether that be, stress or trauma around health, whether that was stress or trauma around economics, whether that was stress or trauma of just being thrown and being on lockdown all together in one space and place. There was increased stress and trauma. There were different levels of that increase, but we all experienced some level of an increase in stress and trauma, which then also then kind of connects to that second point of the increase in those mental health visits, mental health related visits to the emergency room amongst our students. So we saw that 24% increase in 5 to 11-year-olds and 31% increase in 12 to 17-year-olds just in that 1 year period. Since the beginning of COVID, that January of 2020 or March of 2020 to now. And so I think that makes it even more imperative or more incumbent upon us as educators to really be intentional around how can we bring calm to the classroom? What are the building blocks? How do we even do it to not only maintain that calm for ourselves, but also so that that calm can be contagious in that classroom environment?
Go. So thinking about the importance of with the social emotional learning and the benefits and those types of things, can you talk to us about the social skills curriculum with the Boys Town education model and how that can help with to create calm in the classroom?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it just starts with having that plan and aligning that with what we already know works with academics. We know how to teach to academics. How do we teach to the calm? And again, it is a very similar format. Well, first we want to identify what are some of those common problem behaviors and then attach new learning to that so that we can prevent those problem behaviors. So if we identify that staying calm, that a lot of our kiddos don't have the tools or they may not have the teaching to stay calm, then we want to align that with a plan to teach so that we can prevent those problem behaviors. And once we teach those behaviors, once we do that piece of preventing the problem, then we can start to encourage. Because what we know is if we want the best medicine, if you will, for creating or learning new behaviors or applying new behaviors is reinforcing. And so the more then that we can be intentional about encouraging and reinforcing when they use those skills or when they use what we've taught them for that preventive piece, they're more likely to master that, internalize it, and become better self-managers, which creates a more calm environment. And then that also then flows over into that correction piece of it. So that when we do have to correct, we're correcting in a very similar fashion that we correct to academics, which is generally we identify where the problem is and then we go back and teach it again, or we teach it and we modify how we teach it, or we teach it in a different way or give them additional ways to practice. Our correction is around teaching, and we want to apply that same process to our correction that we want to be teaching in our correction around behaviors as well.
Great. So how does this also, when you think about this kind of social skills curriculum that we're looking here, which is the basis of the Boys Town education model, and looking at strategies that fit in that, can you talk to us a little bit on how that fits with all of the different types of kids, like depending on if you're talking about, we throw terms around of like tier 1, tier 2, the general education environment, some of those different types of strategies, and we can look at that because very often there can be, there's very full classrooms of very different children.
Absolutely. Yeah, excellent. And again, I'm going to go back to an academic answer, right? We start with core curriculum. So we have articulated curriculum that we know that all 7th graders are going to be introduced to these key concepts, to this core curriculum, regardless of where they are. So whether they're in 7th grade in my classroom, or whether they're in 7th grade in John's classroom, or 7th grade in someone else's classroom, we know that that curriculum has been articulated, that we have identified those key concepts to present, that everyone is going to get that basic dosage, right? And that's a similar, we look at behavior, we look at social emotional competencies, we're going to have a plan and we're going to develop it in that same basic format. So the key, the starting point is identifying those skills. So what are those 3 or 4 skills that we might identify specifically to create calm in the classroom? And once we identify those 3 or 4 skills, we're going to make sure that all of us, whether you're in my classroom or John's classroom or Stephanie's classroom, we are all going to teach those 3 or 4 skills in our classroom intentionally and consistently, just as we teach our academic skills. So we're going to use that formal lesson plan, or that formal curriculum guide, to introduce and teach those 3 or 4 skills to create calm that we know is the foundation. So that's that universal. Everyone gets it. But then we know, regardless of how excellent our lesson plans might be, right, at that general level, there's still going to be a few kiddos, that 15% or so, that are still struggling. And so we're going to reteach to them, right? We might do more small group learning with them. We're going to maybe present that same academic skill in a little different format for that 15%, but the skill is the same. Same thing when it comes to social skills. There may be about 15% of your kiddos that, even though we taught it in that general environment, they need a little extra practice, or they need a little extra motivation, we might need to present it to them in a little different way. But again, it's that dosage that is different. They need a little extra help. And then, of course, again, you're still going to have those kiddos academically in your classroom that are really struggling with a concept, perhaps. And so we're going to give them more one-on-one. We're going to give them more support around that academically. Same thing comes in play when it comes to behavior, those social skills, or the ability to stay calm. We might have the best lesson plan in teaching how to stay calm. You still might have those kiddos, and again, looking at the level of trauma and some of those reactionary behaviors. When we look at those trauma responses, right, we refer to those as normal responses to abnormal situations. And so those outbursts that we see, maybe with that 5%, that they're not able to stay calm immediately, we might need to give them more practice or more prompts, right? But we can still have all of those same kiddos in the classroom, just as we would academically. When we're applying the social skills, we can still have all of those same kiddos in our classroom behaviorally and still be able to attend to those needs.
So, as you were talking, and as we're thinking about things in our past several conversations and our past months, everything is where the general underlying theme is, the specificity, the intentionality of it, and looking at, like right now, of the multi-tiered system of supports, and thinking about what types of tools and strategies are available, and if they're used consistently, what kind of impact can that make? And especially, and it's worth the time of where, like last month, we talked about how social skill teaching takes practice for both teachers and students, and being proactive in that way. And when you look at the universal, secondary, tertiary, or whatever, that the types of groups of the types of tools, and thinking about meeting kids where they're at and setting up those bases. If you guys can share with us, and I think we have some specific examples we can talk through of, kind of a top 4 of the idea of creating calm in the classroom, of social skills, or procedures, or some of those types of things that can lay that foundation and are so important for every student. Because, when we look at this, just because a student maybe spends most of their time in that universal area and they've got it, it doesn't mean there are times that they don't need that extra support, or they don't need, that's where it's it's thinking about what kids needs at the time and what we can do to help build those supports for them. So if you can share, let's look at the next slide, which is some specific social skills, and looking at, if you can talk to us about how this fits within the social skills curriculum of the Boys Town education model, and how this fits in that first slide of when we talk about spending time in that proactive world, encouraging, and then what happens with correcting and working in that maybe positive cycle versus getting out of that negative cycle we can very often get into with behavior management.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stephanie. You know, it's interesting as we kind of look at some of the social skills here. You know, one of the thing that's always kind of struck me is, you know, if you've been in education really any length of time, and especially if you've been in the classroom, and I know you've all experienced this, in any classroom, you've got at least a certain percentage of your kids that academically are, you know, what we'd maybe refer to as behind grade level, right? So we're in 8th grade math, but I've got kids in there that might have a 4th grade math level or a 5th grade math level or whatever the case might be. And as teachers, as educators, you know, we accept that as part of the job, right? We wish it wasn't that way, but we accept that as part of the job. And so when we have our lesson plans, whether it's to talk to kids about social skills or academics, we have our lesson plan, but we're accounting for that wide range of ability within one classroom, as Steph was kind of mentioning. And so, you know, within any class, you've got a certain percentage of your kids that are probably going to do well regardless of what you're teaching, who the teacher is, what the other kids that are in the classroom and the dynamics that are there are probably going to do well no matter what. And then, of course, you've got on the other end of the continuum that you've probably got at least a small percentage of kids that are also going to struggle no matter what. And then everybody else kind of tends to fall in the middle. And again, as educators, you know, we accept that reality. What's interesting to me, though, is we're kind of in that same boat when it comes to behavioral development. You know, I can be a teacher in a junior level in high school and have kids that are behaviorally in junior high, right? We've all experienced that. I've got some kids that fit that description in my own house, right? So we've experienced that. So, but what's interesting to me is while oftentimes we accept that academically, we have a harder time accepting that when it comes to behavior. And so when, you know, as Steph was talking earlier on, just about some of the stressors that are involved in teaching and the dynamics in a classroom, and we talk about, you know, creating calm, you know, how do we take all that, knowing that we've got this wide range of behavioral development in one classroom and still make it work? And so again, it all comes back to that, to having that plan. And so as you look on the screen here with the different social skills that we talk about, that's where this Boys Town education model is so important, is because in the midst of stress and emotion and the normal chaos in the course of a typical day at school, we need to have a plan because we know behavior is going to occur. And if we have a plan, we're more likely to be able to deal with those things and deal with them successfully. I think we can all look back at times, either as educators or as parents, when things haven't gone well, and it's because we probably weren't very prepared to deal with the emotion and the stress of the moment. And then when it's over, we look back and go, gosh, I really probably could have handled that a lot differently. So having that plan is really critical. So one of the things that's really unique about Boys Town's model is, again, if you look at some of the skills that are on the page here, is we've broken down the individual skills that we know are important for kids to be successful, not only in school, but pretty much everywhere. And we've broken them down into very observable and behavioral components. So things like looking at the person, using a pleasant voice tone, giving kids the words to say, giving a reason, listening to the other person, all those kinds of things. And we break that down and we use those pieces in order to teach the bigger concept of the social skill. And again, teachers, if you look at this, hopefully you're thinking, well, I do the same thing academically. This is exactly how I break down an academic skill. It's the same way. We're just putting it in the context of behavior. And so, as you can see, we've got some skills here that would directly impact helping our classroom be more calm. If kids can, rather than just shouting out or arguing with you, learning how to disagree appropriately is a really important skill. It's also a really hard one. If you've ever tried to have a calm disagreement with your spouse, you probably can relate to how difficult that skill can be, right? Asking for help is another one. A lot of times the chaos and stress that comes in a classroom is for kids that are feeling stressed themselves and they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to act with that, or maybe they just don't see that don't feel that there's someone in that classroom that can help them. So knowing how to ask for help. And then certainly, as part of any resolution to some sort of conflict or stress, is being able to make an apology afterwards. That's the first step to kind of repairing and rebuilding a relationship with somebody. And so again, we've broken those steps down because it makes it easier for students to learn, certainly makes it easier for the adults to teach. And those are the kinds of things that we focus on. And again, if you go back to the very beginning, the Stay Calm plan is we want to make sure that we're teaching those proactively. I'm kind of going backwards here, but oftentimes, especially when we're dealing with problematic issues or things that cause stress or conflict in the classroom, a lot of times the only time we talk about those problems is when they're problems. And so identifying some of those neutral times where we can sit down with kids where maybe tensions are a lot lower, it's more likely to go well if we can talk about those things in neutral times. And we certainly want to individualize those skills so they're meaningful to the different individual personalities that we have in the classroom, and all those kinds of things, giving them some kind of a plan so that they can learn some strategies to be able to stay calm in the classroom. And again, it's kind of piggybacking what Stephanie said earlier, just what we model obviously is a significant piece of that. So just kind of on a bigger scale here, it's interesting because I get a lot of calls from people that are interested. They hear about the Boys Town curriculum, which you see a piece of here on the screen, and they ask about that. And while that's a significant piece, obviously our whole program is built around that. What really makes or breaks your classroom, your school, the relationship with an individual student is when those conflicts do arise, whether they're small or big. It's having the ability from a staff perspective to be able to handle them effectively. That's the critical point. So having all these conversations and identifying the skills is definitely the first part of that. But when it's 10 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon and something's happened, it's the ability of that staff person to react in an effective way and having a plan and a strategy and something to, give that student, whether it's these social skills or a plan or whatever it might be. That's really where the critical learning takes place. And then of course the other piece that really is not on here that I think is so significant, and quite honestly it determines whether or not, in my opinion, whether or not any of this is effective, is the relationships that you have with your kids. Sound relationships, sound respectful relationships with kids makes all of this stuff possible. It makes it easier to teach. Kids are going to be more likely to listen. They're going to be less likely to create conflict and stress in the classroom because there's that relationship with you. They're kids. There's still going to be problems. But if I've got that sound relationship, instead of it escalating to here, maybe it only escalates to here because I do have that relationship. So that's a significant piece. Now, even that is tricky. Sometimes, especially new teachers, sometimes we have a tendency to want to be friends with kids. Well, there certainly is a friendship element to a strong, teacher-student relationship, but you have to be careful with that, obviously. You still have to be an authority figure. You have to be seen as a teacher, but that relationship is an absolutely critical piece. So if we have that strong relationship, we have a sound strategy for how we're going to teach, and then we have kind of these social skills and those kinds of things, or is what we're going to teach. We're actually giving kids strategies. We're giving them a plan so that when those things happen, hopefully as time goes on, that they can begin to put some of these things into practice. And we also got to know that it's, for a lot of kids, it's a slow turn, right? These situations didn't happen overnight. Behavior isn't going to change overnight. It's typically a longer process. But if we have predictable and consistent responses, that's where behavior change really starts to occur.
Yeah, and I definitely think, one of the things of my experience of working over the years with the Boys Town education model and looking at something as, we look at the screen right now, and it's basic social skills. These are things, but, thinking about ourselves, how many years ago, how good was I at the age of 12 of asking for help. I would more apt to get frustrated and get angry and get emotional and move through those types of things. And so when we look at this level of calm that we can create by helping kids see how to do it. Think about us even as adults and how we've gone through this. Anytime we come to a new situation, a difficult situation, anything that brings up stress, how the process of what can we do to make it easier. One is knowing what to expect and knowing the words to say. And that's where something of like making an apology, that can be very hard for kids. And and looking at this type of layout and breakdown of analyzing skills and sharing them and then being able to teach them in a way and reinforce them just helps to, again, create that calm. And applying these, as the years I've worked at Boys Town, I found like I am becoming, it helps so much of where taking us back to that level of center and saying, okay, this is what to expect. This is how I can handle the situation. This is how I can share the situation and how I can help kids in that way. So when we look at just breaking down the consistency of the social skills, and when you think about these are all things that kids could see themselves doing. They can practice doing them, and then you can help to reinforce and shape the behavior of, because there's going to be some of those kids that it's going to take them time to figure out how to disagree appropriately. It's going to take them time to do that. And so this gives you a concrete plan of what you can talk to them about. You did a good job. You were working on explaining why you feel differently, but you got a little bit angry again. Let's practice that again. And you got a little upset and different types of things. So what kind of tools and strategies can help when you have your skills in place? Then what should you do?
Yeah, and so I think you want to teach to it, right? So once you have that curriculum identified, once you've identified those key skills, and in this case we're talking about creating that calm, once we identify these 4 skills that we know will help to build calm in the classroom, then we want to teach them. So we want to use a formal process in teaching those skills that really aligns with the same process we use when we teach academics, right? So we're going to introduce the skill just like we introduce any other academic concept. And we want to use a hook or some sort of ask questions related to that skill. Why is it important to use this skill? When are some times when you haven't used the skill and it's gone south or it's been a problem? So have that conversation and then describe, because we do know that sometimes it can be really hard to stay calm. That we're going here in this classroom, when we want to stay calm, we're going to use straw breathing. And what straw breathing is you breathe in through your nose for about a count of 4, you hold it for a count of 3, and then you breathe out as if you have a teeny tiny straw in your mouth for about a count of 7. So when we talk about staying calm here, we're going to use straw breathing. So we want to be very specific in the steps or in explaining what that skill is. So label the skill and describe those steps. And then we want to give them a reason. And reasons are important because, well, for a lot of reasons, but one reason because what is one of the questions we hear all the time from kids when we teach them something new, especially around a behavior? Why? Why? Why do I have to do it? Why? So because we can predict it, we just plan for it in the lesson plan and we give a reason. Why is it important to be able to stay calm like that? Why is it important for me to be able to straw breathe? Well, it's important for you to be able to do that because that'll help you to manage those big emotions so they don't get out of control and people are more likely to hear what you have to say. So I'm just going to be very specific, very brief around why you should use that skill or try to use that skill and what are the possible outcomes if you do use that skill. Now, keep in mind when we talk about reasons there are 3 key elements to effective reasons. And I put this under the ABCs of identifying reasons. A, to avoid a negative outcome. So do this so that you can avoid this. When you're able to stay calm, you can avoid whatever that may be. So avoid a negative outcome. B, it is a benefit to the student. That's where they are, right? Developmentally, it's all about me. So go ahead and tie that reason to a specific benefit to the student. If they're able to stay calm, it's more likely that you're going to get your needs met. So something specific to them. So benefit to self. And then finally, the C, the concern for others. When you're able to stay calm yourself, it also allows those around us to be able to stay calm and get their work done and stay focused. So you can, when you're thinking about those reasons, as you're looking at this in a similar format that you would look at a lesson plan, keep those key elements in mind of avoiding a negative benefit to self or concern for others. And then finally, give them an opportunity to practice. So I just introduced you to straw breathing as a way to stay calm when you might have big emotions. So now let's go ahead and do it together. Go ahead, breathe in through your nose for a count of 4, hold for a count of 3, and breathe out through your straw for a count of 7. Awesome job. Then I'm just going to go right into my academic plan. So again, it's that piece of once we've identified what those skills are, we want to be very intentional in teaching those skills in a planned way, similar to the way we would teach academics.
Great. And that's the thing too of where when we started this kind of conversation with Boys Town National Training in this webinar series, the key was how much practice it does take. It's one of those things of where, I think about where there's so many questions that come up, and we'll talk through some questions. We've been getting some on one, we talked about why this is important and how it can help and those types of things. But when it comes down to it, where last month that topic of it takes practice for both the students and the teachers. For students, it's the key part of that practice at the neutral time of doing that, because we, just like you've been talking about tying it to academics, we don't give them the math test first. We give them the chance to practice. And so why do we do that with social skills of where, and Steph, I think you said this last month, you really can't correct it if you haven't told them what your expectations are. And so that's part of the key idea of thinking about creating calm in the classroom is what are you doing to proactively do that, and how are you sharing those expectations, and how are you reinforcing those expectations, and what tools, and how intentional are you being? I think I have said the word intentional so many more times since we started in December then, but it's a really good check-in. So thinking about the tips, thinking about plan teaching and thinking about using a social skills curriculum and incorporating it into your classroom. Can you share some, just a couple tips of how it makes it work and how it is easier to do than you think it is? Of thinking about plan teaching, because you can look at this and think, oh my gosh, that's adding more into what I already do, but how to make it less overwhelming.
Yeah, I think like with anything, especially when it's new, starting small is really important. That's probably the best advice I could give you. And for a lot of folks too, I guess it would be start small, but then also don't feel like you've got to tackle the big problems either. Identifying maybe some of those small things that interfere with your classroom being successful, and probably starting there just to get a little bit of success. I'll go back to kind of what I said earlier. Again, having that relationship is really important. We've talked, big part of our education model. We haven't talked about it a whole lot here, but we talk a lot in our workshops and our training, and really emphasize the importance of being positive and reinforcing kids a lot. So it isn't always just coming up with a plan to help them deal with with the negative, but it's also in the course of our interactions with kids that we are reinforcing the good things that they're doing, so that they're not always hearing from us in response to a problem, but we are talking to them about the things that they do well and the successes that they are having. So that's good. Those are really important pieces. But again, I would start small, start with things that you may be comfortable with. Again, remembering that probably the most significant piece of that preventive piece is talking to kids at a neutral time, when tensions aren't going to be so high. Hey, John, I noticed, hey, I want to talk to you about how you make an apology, or I know sometimes you get upset and frustrated. Boy, we all do. Let's talk about what you can do the next time that's going to happen, because we know it will, right? So let's come up with a plan together, and then having that dialogue with kids. I think those are as critical as anything. But again, understanding that it is going to take, it's going to take a repetition. Kids don't learn academic skills overnight. It takes repetition, right? The same is going to be true with how we do when we're teaching social skills. So starting small, I think it's also going to be really important. If you go back to the social skills that we showed you on the screen, and notice just how those were written. They're very behavioral. So we want to talk in very behavioral terms with kids, being very specific. Here's what you do. Here's some things that you can say. Here's how it should look. Here's how it should sound. The more specific we can be, the easier it is for kids to understand. And then quite honestly, it makes it a lot easier for us to follow up with them afterwards as to whether or not they're doing the things that we've asked them to do. So I think those are great ways to start. The better you know your kids, the more insight you're going to have about the kinds of things that you need to teach with them. It's pretty safe to say most kids need a lot of work with following directions, being able to accept feedback, accepting no for an answer. Those are kind of universal trouble spots. I know a lot of adults that have trouble with those. So, those are always safe places to start too. But again, the biggest piece of that is having a plan and being real specific with how you're imparting that to kids and letting them know what they can do, and practice. That's a real key as well. In terms of academics, we just don't tell kids what to do and expect them to get it. We actually practice. We want to see them demonstrate some level of understanding. And again, the same is true with how we teach and reinforce behavior, is that practice piece. It's an important piece.
So I did get a couple questions. Here's one so it seems like in every class, there's always maybe one or two students that kind of negatively impact the rest of the class. How do I bring them in without losing everyone else?
Good question. And I would just start with that once you've taught that skill, like John said, once we've taught it, then we can start to shift our focus to increasing our reinforcement or our praise around that skill. So if I know that there's one kiddo that tends to really lose it in certain situations, what I might do is try and be preemptive or preventive about that and give them a quick prompt. I know sometimes it's hard to follow instructions, but remember, just look, say, do. And that might avoid the escalation by just giving them that prompt, that little brief reminder, instead of waiting, kind of like the catch ya game. I'm not going to wait until they've already failed. I'm going to set them up for success. And so when we have those components already in place, once we've done the process of teaching that in that planned format, then we can spend more time on the prompting, the reinforcing, the redirecting, because they know exactly what we're talking about. And so it kind of gets them in that headspace of, oh, I know what I'm supposed to do. Now, will they always choose to do it? No, because they're kids. But then we have a plan for that, right? Then we go into corrective teaching mode, right? So, but we want to have multiple tools, and they all start with having that plan, using those planned teaching formats. So then all the rest of these pieces can come into play.
Great. John, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that pretty well hits it. I think, again, it just, for some of those kids that really struggle, and it's, we've all had those kids that do tend to kind of dominate the environment sometimes. And so if you think about some of those kind of more fringe type kids or fringe personalities, a lot of times, it's not unusual for them to maybe not have many friends, or if they do, it's typically not a great peer group. And, or maybe they just don't have relationships with really any of the staff that are in place. So again, I just kind of keep going back to, obviously the importance of the teaching is huge, but we want to make sure that those kids that are kind of on that fringe, that they've got some connection. If you feel a connection in class, or to your school, you're more likely to be receptive to teaching and to those kinds of interactions. So it's really hard to have one without the other. And again, so yes, having that plan, redirecting, teaching, prompting, and then the other big piece of that obviously is follow through. So when it happens, just like academically, if I've taught something and it goes well, I reinforce that. The same is true with behavior or with academics. If I've taught something and it goes well, I want to make darn sure that I reinforce it. If it doesn't go well, what do I do academically? I reteach it, right? Same is true behaviorally. If it doesn't go well, I reteach it. And again, practice, 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 practice.
Well, and I think too, John, what came to mind when you were talking is some of those kiddos that are on that fringe that tend to act out more quickly, sometimes that's the only time they ever get any attention. And so this kind of is a counter to that as well. We know that those are some of those attention-seeking behaviors, and the only time anyone pays attention to me, whether I'm at home or if I'm at school or wherever I am, is when I act out. It's the only way I can get people to talk to me or pay attention to me. That we want to flip that, because if we teach them that behavior proactively, then we can be intentional about reinforcing and giving them praise. So they start to see, we start to flip that script of, oh, I'm getting attention when I'm doing things well, not only just when I'm acting out. So it does give you that framework also to kind of fill kids' buckets, because a lot of times those kiddos that are acting out the most are the ones that have the greatest needs. They need that attention. And so this allows them to get more positive attention.
Well, and it's why in our training, we really emphasize, that 4-to-1 ratio at a minimum, and again, it gives teachers, you hate to get too, I'm not a big numbers guy, and you hate to get too hung up on that, but it does give you something to kind of in my head go, I should be interacting at a minimum with all of my kids at least 4 times as often as I have to interact with them either negatively or correctively. And so again, if you're doing that on a consistent basis, kids start to learn I can get my needs met through pro-social behavior. I don't have to act like a knucklehead in order to get some love in class, right? Yeah. And so they start to learn that. And so eventually, again, it can be a slow turn, but that's where then behavior starts to occur. It's like, oh, they do recognize that I've got some skill here. Because let's be honest, even your most difficult kid still has things that they're good at. We just don't we don't see it enough. Or again, they've kind of figured out, hey, if I really want to, get where I want to go, it's to rock the boat. And so helping them understand that you can get your needs met through positive behavior versus negative. That's, all those pieces together make a big impact on that.
Yeah, definitely. Those are great tips. And, one of the things I want people to realize and know as you're sitting here going, yeah, that's great, but what do but how do I do it? And we keep going back to that whole idea of it's going to take practice. You got to start small, but there's also a lot of resources that we have for you. And I really want to hope, if everyone's here, you've probably been on our website, but I'm going to share the screen just to show our website, because there's a lot of stuff on there that, we want people to, we want you guys to be able to use these tools and strategies, and it doesn't fall on you to reinvent the wheel. So we have a ton of stuff under our resources tab of more webinars. They're free that you can watch in that way. Also the lesson plans and activities. If you look at this page, this is a lot of different resources, and we continue to add to that. But also I'm going to go back to the resources. The Boys Town Press is another department that we have where the sole purpose of this department is to create tools, resources, storybooks, guides, activity guides, all of those types of things. And there's so much on these websites, and there's so many tools that we can help you. This right here, this Teaching Social Skills to Youth book, I want to make sure that we see that, because the skills that we talked about today and 183 more basic to complex life skills for children and youth. This is an amazing resource that I hope we can get in the hands of every educator across the country, because it can make your lives a lot easier, because it not only gives you 183 skills, it also gives you a lot of information on personalizing and individualizing those skills and that type of information. And in the packet that you'll get to download, there is a coupon code that you can get this book with 25% off. And it comes with downloads and posters and all kinds of information. So just wanted to make sure that as you're sitting here watching and thinking, yes, this is great, I want to do these things, I want to incorporate this more, this can help you when we talk about starting small, incorporating different tools and strategies and those types of things. We have a lot of things already built out there to help you in that way. In addition to our workshops and modules, and we have paid modules, and we have all kinds of things to help in that way. We have about 10 minutes left, and I have, this is a very interesting question. That is, this is from a high school teacher who says, some of the behaviors from students that are intimidating. Any suggestions about responding to older kids and kind of dealing with those newer teacher issues, being confident in the classroom with dealing with some of those behaviors?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And again, I'm sure anybody that's been in education or even a parent has probably experienced this at some point, along the way. Sometimes people aren't maybe afraid to admit it, but we've all probably experienced that in some way. So having that kind of fear is definitely not unusual. So you shouldn't feel bad about that. But I think, one of the things that helps people get over fear, and again, I think, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but it just keeps going back to the same concepts, and that is to have a plan, right? I'm less fearful, I'm less nervous when I have a plan, when I know what I'm going to do, if I know what I'm going to say. One of the things that we haven't touched on in this that I think it's important to at least mention is we need to make sure that, if we want things to be calm, we've got to be calm ourselves, right? And so knowing what our own triggers are, knowing what kind of things, like for example, I know back in my younger days when I got upset, my voice level definitely went up. Well, that tended to escalate me probably just as much as it did the kid that I was trying to work with. So being very intentional about keeping my voice quiet and calmer, even though kids might be escalating, the louder they got, the quieter I would try and get. So little things like that can make a big difference. But having that plan, and again, that's where I think is just so unique with our model is, again, we don't just tell you what to teach with our social skills, but we give you the tools to teach and how to teach it. So, when somebody's escalating, starting off with that praise or empathy, having some real concrete tools about how to de-escalate behavior and get things back to a point where our kids are teachable again. So having that plan is critical. And you think about, why do sports teams have practice? So when they're in the middle of the competition, when stress is high, they can perform. Why do military personnel have drills? So when tension is high, they can perform. At every level, why did you do your teacher practice, your student teaching, so that when you were in there for the real deal, you had some practice, so that when tensions were high, you had that experience to draw from to help you be more successful. So again, I think it's just having that plan, having that strategy, sticking to it. And then we also know that kids and adults do better when things are predictable and consistent. So if I can be consistent in how I teach and how I respond, and I feel better about that when kids know how I'm going to respond if they engage in a certain kind of behavior and they know what to expect from me, they're more likely to make a better choice as well. So that would be what I would add. Steph, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that'd be another great talk. We could spend an hour on this one alone, but that is something that we talk about. Once you have that plan, that predictability, we do know there's going to be times where kids are kids and emotions get the better of them. And we see that conflict in the classroom. And so when we look at conflict resolution, we do have a plan for how do we manage ourselves, which John kind of touched on, your voice tone, what is your body language? You know, one of those things, like especially with boys, if it's a young man that is escalating, we're better off going shoulder to shoulder with them instead of eye to eye with them, giving them that. So just being aware of how to manage yourself. And then we go into how to manage the environment, making sure that everyone is safe. And then we talk about managing the learning. And so it really is a process. But all of the processes that we talk about starts with teaching a skill. We have to teach the skill so then we have that foundation to depend on in those moments of conflict so that we're managing that intentionally and with a plan.
Very good.
Another good topic.
Yeah, exactly. Because we just got a question about, and I think we've talked a lot about this, but just I'm going to read it so in case there's any additional tips. What can be done with children that are very combative and sent out of the room? And so I think a lot of the things that you talked about, the plan, and you both talked about managing the learning, managing yourself, and managing the environment. We have specific of a process. And again, you know, I think as everyone's is getting very familiar with, if you're not already using the Boys Down education model, you're going to see we have tools and strategies that are very clear and built upon things. So when you have a child that is combative and does ultimately result in choosing a referral, that type of thing, we have a process of administrative intervention. And an administrative intervention is a process. It is not a person or a place. It does not mean sent to the principal's office, but it is a specific process that is very clear and helps not only the adults, but the students know what to expect. And it's, again, based on the keyword of consistency, intentionality, and teaching. And so we have a workshop for administrative intervention. That is a model that can be implemented. We also have a module that you can learn more about. It's a on-demand, self-paced module to learn more about the administrative intervention process that really includes de-escalation. What else do you guys want to add about that?
Well, I would just, in response to this specific question, again, we could have a whole session on just these kinds of issues real easily. But I guess where I would maybe just start with this specific one is, you know, a lot of times kids, if we really kind of take a step back, a lot of times you'll see some patterns with kids. You know, so with this particular kiddo here, you know, is there certain situations that tend to cause them to escalate? You know, is it in response to, you know, is it typically peer conflict? Is it, you know, when they're held to some level of accountability, they tend to escalate? Is it when they're getting feedback about something? You tend to see some kind of pattern. So if you do start to see that, you go, okay, I know that, you know, every time Stephanie freaks out, well, it's been because she's just, you know, been working in a small group. So, okay, that should be key one. I need to do a lot of pre-teaching and preventive teaching about how to work in small groups. And so do some teaching with her, probably do some extra teaching with other kids that are in the groups with her, give her a plan of things to do, you know, how to handle things when maybe she starts to get frustrated, all those kind of things. But again, you're probably picking up a common theme here is, you know, it's having that plan and teaching what that plan is going to be. So that's probably where I would at least start. And then again, go back and say, you know what, let's make sure that ratio is 4-to-1 or more, especially with kids that are kind of chronic like that. It might need to even be higher. So let's really look for places where we can, you know, reinforce them, keep them pumped up. But then again, talk with them about those issues at that neutral time and come up with a plan together that can help them be more successful.
And I think that's a really good point, and where not only is it the plan for when it happens, but you can, using the right tools and strategies and planning beforehand, of looking at of being proactive, of being encouraging, can really reduce the amount of time that you have to spend in correction and de-escalation and that type of proactive. And it's so much easier to live in that world than it is to try to to work with the de-escalation and the correction and those types of things. Okay, we're almost at 2:00, but I have one more question that I just want to throw out there. And if anyone needs to leave, they can. We're still recording. But this one is on restorative practices, a restorative practices intervention specialist. Any suggestions in regards to social skills? They use a restorative center to help support their teachers in the classroom. The book is a great thing, but any other tips on helping to support teachers in the classroom with restorative practices interventions?
So I think, I'll go back to, this is very restorative in nature, just this whole process of focusing on front-loading kids with the skills that they need to be successful, holding each other accountable to teach those skills, to model those skills, to practice those skills, prompt those skills. Really brings in sort of that restorative approach that ties, like with what John said. Sometimes we don't know exactly how to build healthy relationships in a classroom. We don't spend a lot of time being taught that. And so just the foundation of taking the time to teach these skills to kiddos instead of assuming that they know how to do it helps to create that more calm, restorative environment. When things do go haywire, though, and we go back to those social skills, well, a huge restorative piece is making an apology. And so through that process, and I know you alluded to that, Stephanie, of the administrative piece, because all that administrative intervention piece is a continuation of the teaching that started in the classroom. And all that is just more one-on-one time for whoever is working through that process to give that student, that child, additional time to practice the skill that was challenging for them in the moment that caused them to lose it. And so because you weren't able to practice that skill in the moment, you are going to have to make an apology. And so just that apology and letting teachers know that when kiddos do earn an office referral, when there are those days that the planets have aligned and they just can't control themselves, earn that office referral, their ticket back in is an apology. And that is it. That means we are restored. That is it. That means the child has taken responsibility. Whoever has worked through that behavior intervention with them feels that they've done a nice job of practicing that skill. And then me as a teacher, it's a clean slate. Yes, you're welcome back into the classroom. Here's what you missed. Here's, I want to get you back up to speed. So I think that apology piece, and not the apology in and of itself, but the process in and of itself that ends with an apology when kiddos do have to be referred out of the classroom, builds that restorative environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things I think that is so key in that process is it's not just teaching them, they have to practice making the apology. It has to meet a certain standard, and they have to understand that not everybody is going to be ready to accept your apology. It's that understanding of thank you for listening, thank you, looking at those types of things, and then moving forward of here's how I'm going to try to do better in the future, and here's how I can overcome that. So yeah, that when it comes down to also letting the classroom teachers know that there is a process and that it's a process that works together, and it's not just that if the more they do in the classroom, the better that's going to happen there, and they're being and the teaching is being reinforced in that way. So great. Well, we had some great questions, a great conversation. Thank you so much, John and Steph, for joining us today. And thank you, everyone who is attending. And yes, you can get a copy of the webinar to look back on for references. You will get the recording. We have it recorded. We'll get it all posted. And then we'll also get you the download. So you'll have a takeaway of what we talked about, some of our tips, resources, the coupon code for the book if you don't already have Teaching Social Skills to Youth. And if anyone needs a certificate of attendance, that will be in the email that will follow up with all of those links. So that takes care of our time for today. Again, I really, really appreciate everyone taking their time out of the day to talk about this important topic and join us. And we will be getting information out for our next month conversation with Boys Town National Training. So thanks so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.